Hello there, YouTube. I have a bookish video for you. If you've seen my previous video, I address why I've been missing for the last week and a half. And let's get into the books, because I spoke for a good 15 minutes on just how my life is going in that video, so we can go straight into the books. I was watching a channel. It's Benjamin something. I can never remember his surname. It begins with an M. It's Benjamin McSomething. He runs the Hardcore Literature Book Club. I'll link his channel anyway, so you can check it out. He posted the reading list for the Hardcore Literature Book Club for 2023. And it's a reasonably doable list. But it's filled with massive books. It is reasonably doable. I'm not going to lie. It's not so intimidating that you couldn't read these books. But if you're not an active reader, you're going to see this list and you're going to go, "What on earth are you thinking?" I'm going to read out the list. These are 8 books that are in his reading list for 1 year. War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. So we're starting strong there, aren't we? War and Peace? Really? That was the book you decided to start with? The book that people have as a synonym for extremely long, intimidating books? Right, okay. I mean, fair enough. It's apparently a really good book, and people really want to read it, so makes sense. But even still, it's a bit much, isn't it? Next, The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Front-loading with 2 giant Russian classics. This is a bit much for any book club, really. We say this, but if we front-loaded it with 2 English classics or 2 American classics, even if they were big, if we'd started this with, say, Moby Dick and I don't know. I'm drawing a blank now as to American classics. I've just thought of about 8 different classics. They're all English. So that just goes to show where my brain goes. But yeah, if we'd started with, let's say, English classics, then, right? If we'd started with Charles Dickens books, something like Great Expectations and Middlemarch. Great Expectations isn't even that big, but you get my idea. If you'd started with something like that, no one would have said that was anywhere near as intimidating as starting with War and Peace and The Brothers Karamazov. Those were intimidating books. Next, there's Orlando by Virginia Woolf. So that's a short one, at least by comparison. Then, Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. So, the entirety of Lord of the Rings. I mean, it is one book. I know it's regularly cut into 3, but it is one book. But it's still huge. It's longer than War and Peace. Only slightly, but it is longer than War and Peace. Then, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. And I know how big that is, because I tried reading it this year, and I got about halfway through before just family stuff and health issues meant that I ended up putting it down, and I just haven't gone back to it. I enjoyed what I read. It's actually quite an easy read, but it's still bloody huge. Then there's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, which admittedly is short by comparison, but it's still longer than the average novel. It's over 100,000 words. Then the last 2, I'm sure, are on there just to make people squirm. Paradise Lost by John Milton. An epic poem, an abstract epic poem that is recontextualizing biblical texts. That is notoriously difficult to read. And just to make sure that he can one-up that, he then adds Gravity's Rainbow by Thomas Pynchon, which is a postmodernist abstract novel that is intentionally difficult to read, and is also as big as a doorstop. So these are big books. I don't know about you, but I look at this list and I think, it is doable. It's 1 year and it's 8 books, but it's 8 huge books. And my reading year for this year has fallen off a cliff. The summer hit, and we started doing the book club thing that we do on the Excessive Detail server. We've got our little readathon thing where we compete for 6 months on reading books and trying to challenge ourselves to read a little outside our comfort zone. I had this crossword with popular booktuber books and things like that. It was going to be a whole big thing. And then 2 months into the 6-month readathon, my health dropped dramatically, and then we've had a lot of problems personally. My dad died, which I basically just became a zombie for a month after that. I have not picked up a book properly in about 3 months. So that 6-month readathon, half of that I just didn't read at all. And I wasn't the only one. Other people seemed to just fall off from that. I think because I wasn't really doing anything or pushing it, it felt like it was dying. So a lot of people just didn't take part. So my reading has been off this year. And whilst this is doable, this is 8 huge texts. 8 massive texts. So I thought, the idea is to get people reading classics. And classics are cool. I like classics. So I'm up for getting people to read classics. But at the same point, these classics are going to be so intimidating that it's going to put people off. Now, it's called the Hardcore Literature Book Club, so I suppose that's what you expect. But what if we had something else, something in between? So I'm going to propose a different list. I'm going to propose a list. We don't have to do this. I'm not suggesting we start our own book club. I'm not saying that I'm going to read these books. But I'm going to propose another list. This is just a thought experiment list, if you will. My plan was, I looked up War and Peace. I looked up the word count. What if I could get an entire list that would take less time to read than just War and Peace? So you can read War and Peace, or you can read this entire list of books. So that's what I've done. I have a list of books, and they are all together less in word count, and, in my opinion, less dense than War and Peace, making this a purposeful list of books that should be an easy introduction to classic reading. So, let's start. I'm going to start with a bit of Charles Dickens. Now, you've seen this book before. This is my bind-up of Charles Dickens books, my nice leather-bound classics, Canterbury Classics collection. It's got 4 novels in here, and that's kind of a lie. It doesn't have 4 novels. It has 3 novels and a novella. And the novella is A Christmas Carol. Now, A Christmas Carol is short. And people don't realise quite how short, because it's so well known. But let's see if I can get the... Here we are. Christmas Carol starts on page 285 and finishes on page 337. So that tells you something. It's about 50 pages long. 285. Here we are. Okay. A Christmas Carol. And it's only about 50 pages long, so 335. Of this book, that is A Christmas Carol. Just those pages. It's a tiny, tiny amount of the book. It is truly very little. Right? It is a novella, and you can easily read this without too much trouble. It is 32,000 words, which, to put that into perspective, is only a third of the first Harry Potter book, I believe. believe the first Harry Potter book was 90,000 words. It is one of the things I like to use as my barometer for book size. 'Cause it's a book that a lot of people have read and a lot of people are familiar with. Is The Hunger Games. The Hunger Games is 100,000 words long, and is considered to be the standard novel. A Christmas Carol you could read 3 times over, and it would still be shorter than The Hunger Games. So that gives you an idea as to just how short it is. Now, I thought I'd recommend that as our beginning. It's a nice Christmassy one. So you could read that straight after Christmas and it would feel quite comfortable as a January read. It'd still stay in the theme and feel of the holiday. The next one, and I've got another one of my Canterbury Classics leather bounds down, is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which is, again, another fantastic book. But it's, again, another novella. It starts on page 257 and it ends on page 301, so it's about the same size. So 257, here we are, and it ends on 301, so, again, that there is The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde from this book. It's a tiny portion of the book. Now, you could read others from this collection, honestly. Robert Louis Stevenson has plenty in here that you could read, but I wanted to pick one that would be particularly short. Like, if we go with Treasure Island, that's 137 pages long, so it's almost 3 times the length. But the others are similar in length. Like, you get a fair few that are under 100 pages long in this, because this has, 7 stories in it. And even with that size, like, if you divide that up by 7, they're all going to be relatively short. But Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is only 29,000 words. It's even shorter than A Christmas Carol. So that gives you an idea as to just how short these are. And these are fairly easy. These were often marketed towards children, because they are easy reads. They're good reads, but they're easy reads. Speaking of children, I'm going to actively recommend some children's books. The first one, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Now, this book looks big. It doesn't look big, but it looks relatively normal size for a book. This is 2 books. This is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So, again, this is bigger than it should be for what you're reading. What you actually need to be reading, if you're just reading Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, is up to page 102. Which is... yes. 102 is the last chapter. It's 119, sorry. So, a little more than that, but not by much. There we go, that much. So again, still less than half. Because, again, there's 2 books in here. There's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So, if you enjoy that, you can continue to read the sequel. Same idea. I have The Jungle Book by Rudyard Kipling. Again, this looks like a bigger book, but it's really not. It's this contains The Jungle Book, but it also contains the second Jungle Book, which is the sequel to The Jungle Book. And the first one is only up to page 143. So we're looking at that much of the book. Again, less than half. So these books look bigger than they are. They're also illustrated. So there's less words on each page. Like, we're talking about books here that are written with children in mind and are generally quite short. So, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, less than 31,000 words, so about the same length as A Christmas Carol. The Jungle Book, a bit longer. This is 54,000 words, which is still half of The Hunger Games. So, I want to move away from children's stories now, or at least stories designed with children in mind, and I want to look at other books, like more more adult literature. So, the next one, Picture of Dorian Gray. This one, again, it's very deceptive, because this is not just the Picture of Dorian Gray. It also has a load of further reading and a huge introduction that's almost 50 pages long, and a collection of reviews and articles about the text. So this is not just the book. It's actually the book plus more writings about the Picture of Dorian Gray. And a great example of this is that this is the Penguin cloth-bound classic edition. But I also have a different edition of it here, which is the Arcturus pocket leather-bound. And it is significantly smaller. This is just the text of Picture of Dorian Gray. And these Arcturus leather-bound pocket books are really, really pretty books. I really like them. I haven't read from the Penguin's cloth-bound classics. I'm aware that this design rubs off if you've got sweaty hands and you've been holding the book for a while. It wears down and wears off, which means that if you see someone who's got a massive collection of these on their shelves and these are all pristine, they've not read them. They've not read from these editions. I haven't read from these editions. I've got quite a few of these. I've read from paperbacks of the same books, or I've read a different edition, like this copy of Picture of Dorian Gray, which is starting to warp a little bit. I don't know if you can see it. It's not quite so bad at the moment, actually. But you can just about see that the pages are starting to warp at the edge. At least you can't actually see that. I can see it anyway. But yeah, that was because I was foolish and I left it on the radiator when I was reading it, and the gold leaf doesn't like the heat. So do not leave gold leaf books on a radiator or anything where there's heat. It causes the pages to curl and twist. So yeah, not a good move. Not a good move at all. But the Picture of Dorian Gray is... I have it here. It is the longest book out of the ones that I'm going to suggest, at 65,000 words. But even at 65,000 words, it's still only 2/3 of a Hunger Games. So this is well worth reading. I highly recommend it. So far we've got 2 from my big leather bounds, and we've got 3 there. So we're up to 5 books. How many am I going to get into the same amount of text as Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace? Well, War and Peace depends on the translation. It's somewhere between 535,000 and 580,000 words, depending on the translation. I have actually kept to the lower of those figures. So all of the books that I'm going to suggest come to 528,000 words. There are a couple of extras, like if you add on the second Jungle Book and Through the Looking Glass, you're adding on about an extra 80,000 words. So at that point, you're over what it would be to be on par with War and Peace. But you don't have to do that. I'm not recommending those specifically. Those just happen to be the editions I own. But you can if you want to. It wouldn't add much to your reading time either. So, next book, I'm going to go with The Great Gatsby. Now, you may remember, if you've seen my my book tour, I have a big leather bound, same as these, of F. Scott Fitzgerald's work with The Great Gatsby and a bunch of others. This is just The Great Gatsby in one of these little collectible, one of these little pocket leather-bound books. These are really nice to travel with. They're tiny. They can just be thrown in a bag. They're nice, hard leather-bounds, but they feel nice to read from. They're really, really pleasant. This is just the text again for The Great Gatsby. Because The Great Gatsby is so short, I wondered what on earth was in that book. I have since looked in there, and it is just his little novels, but for some reason they name it The Great Gatsby. and other stories. And I'm like, that feels like it's undervaluing the other books, especially when they make up the majority of the book. Great Gatsby still. Fantastic book, well worth a read. And it is only 47,000 words. So that's not too difficult. Now, let's put these figures into context. The average person can read 250 words a minute. So, if you can read 250 words a minute, you can read 1,000 words in about 4 minutes. Let's assume that you're going to read slowly and you read 1,000 words in 5 minutes. Yeah, that's reasonably doable. Yeah? That means that you would read 12,000 words in an hour. So if you're going to read 12,000 words in an hour, you could get through a book that is just shy of 50,000 words in 4 hours. So this book, at 47,000 words, is a 4-hour read. That's one afternoon. If you wanted to read it in one go, you could sit and read this in one afternoon, 4 hours. And that's if you read at a standard pace, and we've slowed it down as well. 250 words a minute is the average reading pace for the average adult. My reading pace is actually slightly slower. I read at around 230 words a minute, so 4 hours is about right for me. I like to read slow. I like to visualize what I'm reading. But you could read faster. People who read a lot can up their reading speed past 300 words a minute, even up to 350 words a minute quite comfortably. People reading for reference material can scan pages and read at over 400 words a minute. People who claim that they read faster than that, they're skimming. They're not reading, they're skimming. And I include in this voracious readers who claim to be reading faster than that by not sub-vocalizing. They're skimming. You can tell by simply taking the number of words per minute and dividing it down into words per second, and then just trying to read that many words in a single second and see how much it would take for your eyes to scan over that many words and process them. You physically can't do it. So if someone says, oh yeah, I can read 600 words a minute, think about that. What that means, there's 60 seconds in a minute. What that means is they're claiming to read 10 words per second. Time it. Try it yourself. Get any book, even a children's book, even a book with very simple words, and try to read 10 words in a second. In 1 second. Could you read 40 words in that? I sure as hell couldn't. Obviously, I'm estimating how long a second is, but you get the idea. So people who claim to be able to read way faster, they're lying, possibly to themselves. A lot of these people think that they can read. They're not. They're skimming. They're skimming. They're just letting their eyes go across. They're picking out enough to get the gist of it. They think they're reading the book and they're not. It's kind of sad, really. If you're going to read a book, enjoy the book. What matters more? Reading as many books as you can, or enjoying the books you do read. So yeah, 4-hour read for the average person. 3-hour read if you're a fast reader. Either way, you could read this comfortably in a weekend. And you could probably read it in a single day if you put your mind to it. I have a couple more of those style of books. I have The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. Lovely thing. Again, these are all books where I have the big leather bound up on the shelf, but I found these on Amazon and I just had to check them out. And I'm going to do a comparison review comparing these little books to the big leather bound bind up and see whether or not it's worth buying these individual books or just buying one big leather bound. That's a video I plan to make in the future. So, The War of the Worlds. I'm suggesting just this one. It is a shockingly short read at 59,000 words. It's a sci-fi classic. You can't go wrong with it. I I could enjoy just sitting here reading from this little book. It's so easy to sit here with just this tiny little pocket book and just read from this rather than having to have something quite so weighty as something like this. Like this, you feel it in your wrist after an hour or so. Whereas I could easily see myself reading this from cover to cover in a single sitting. Again, 59,000 words. If we're assuming that 12,000 words per hour, that means that this is a 5-hour read. Comfortably 5-hour read. All of these, by the way, can be read in a single day. There isn't a single book here that you could not read in under 6 hours. Regardless, like the longest one would be The Picture of Dorian Gray at 65,000. That would be a 6-hour read. Everything else, 3 to 5 hours, max. Except for this one. This one, you could read this in 2 hours. Name on the cover is not the one I was going to suggest, but At the Mountains of Madness and Other Stories by H.P. Lovecraft. This book, you could read the whole book in 4 hours. But it contains 3 Lovecraft stories. It has At the Mountains of Madness, The Shadows over Innsmouth, and The Thing on the Doorstep. And the one that I would have recommended is The Shadows over Innsmouth. Because I think that if you're going to read just the one Lovecraft, that's the one I'd go for. I know a lot of people go for Call of Cthulhu, but I think The Shadows over Innsmouth would be the one. But At the Mountains of Madness would have been a close second. So honestly, this book, At the Mountains of Madness and Shadows over Innsmouth, in a single little book like this, fantastic value. Like, consider this to be a double entry, if you will. Now, I only have Shadows over Innsmouth on my list at 27,000 words, and At the Mountains of Madness is a little bit longer, about 35,000 words. But that means that you could add the second Lovecraft book in this, and you'd still be under the total for some of the translations of War and Peace. So, definitely one I'd recommend. Lovecraft is such an icon of horror, and has influenced so many different writers that to leave him out when it comes to reading classics of that kind of literature seems daft. So many of his books are short. Almost everything he wrote was a novella or shorter. Call of Cthulhu is only 11,000 words. Like you could squeeze Call of Cthulhu in and it would make almost no difference to the total. 11,000 words, that's a 1-hour read. So yeah, easily done. I do have a few more, because we still haven't reached our total yet. At the moment, we're at 6 books, 7 if you count the second Lovecraft. I have another 3 here. I thought I had 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh no, we're at 8 already. Right, 9 if you include The Mountains of Madness. So we actually have a dozen books, and if you add in the second Lovecraft, we're at 13. So, which seems fitting for Lovecraft somehow. Now, I have a few more modern classics that I think are well worth adding on here. And I'm going to mention possibly the most obvious one here, just because of how short it is. And I think this might be the shortest. No, the Lovecraftian stories are shorter. George Orwell's Animal Farm. Animal Farm is around 30,000 words, between 28,000 and 30,000, depending on where you look it up. No one seems to be able to give me a direct answer as to exactly how many words it is. A tiny little thing. 2-hour read. Easily done. Well worth reading. It's not quite so famous as 1984, but it's still very impactful, and a book I would massively recommend. Obviously, if I'm going to go down this route, I'm going to recommend one of my favourite books, Fahrenheit 451. Yeah, I've spoken about this book before. This book feels like a normal size book, but it's shockingly quite short. Like, this is quite big print in here by comparison to the other books. And Fahrenheit 451 is only 45,000 words. 45,000 words is less than a 4-hour read. So, one day you can crack this out. And the last one I'm going to add on here, Slaughterhouse-Five. Now, Slaughterhouse-Five is 49,000 words. So again, a 4-hour read. That brings us up to 12 books there. So that's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oh no, doesn't. Oh, I've missed one. Of course. I missed it because it's over here on the table. Right. This because my edition is a really nice fancy folio society. And I'm going to add on as my last suggestion here, Lord of the Flies. Good classic dystopian, like psychological horror. Lovely book, by the way. Love this nice folio society edition. Great illustrations, beautiful pages. Really nice binding. It is a delight to be able to read from these kinds of books. It's surprisingly short. 60,000 words. So that's a 5-hour read. Like, you might have read this in school. I know it's on the school curriculum in America, but a 5-hour read. You can read this in 2 days comfortably. 1 day if you read for the whole day. And that's taking breaks, because no one's going to really sit there for 5 hours straight and just read nonstop. I mean, you might if you really get into the book, but this is still a fantastic book and well worth the kind of discussions you'll have. So think about all the books I've suggested here. I've suggested 12 books, 13 if you include the second of the Lovecraft novellas. And all of these books combined are shorter, and I would argue easier to read. Like the prose style, the prose depth is lower. It's a smaller barrier for entry than reading War and Peace. I'm not saying reading War and Peace is a bad idea. War and Peace is, by all accounts, a fantastic novel. But if you had to choose between reading War and Peace and reading all 13 of the books I've mentioned here, which would be a better use of your time if you wanted to get into reading classic books, classic novels, and having a wide range of novels under your belt where you can get a sense of the style of the writing and develop your own taste. If you're still trying to get to grips with classic novels, do you want to be reading something like War and Peace and then have one Russian classic that you can reference and that you can recall? Because if you're reading other things, the more that you've read, the more you have to recall, the more memories you can go back to, the more reference points you've got that you can switch between. So, what is more valuable? I would argue that whilst these shorter classics remain unread, these should be your focus. And that's how I'm going to be approaching my reading. I want to read these big classics. I've got some of these huge classics. Like I said, when I did my my tour of my big leather bounce, I have both Les Mis and Anna Karenina unread on my shelf there. And I want to read them. But they're massive books. And they are 400 to 600,000 words each. Unlike these books, where they are 3 to 5 hour reads, that's a 40 to 50 hour read. Now, if I only read for, say, 2 hours a day, then that'll take me a month to read it. That's assuming I read just that one book for 2 hours a day, every day. Now, how realistic is that? I mean, if I really get into it, maybe it is. But if you're reading the same book constantly for 2 solid months, are you going to get sick of it? Are you going to feel like you're not progressing, like you're treading water? Are you going to look at the book and you're going to say, hey, I've been reading this for 3 weeks, I'm not even halfway through, I feel like I'm never going to reach the end? It can be disheartening. It can put you off. So, you could read it faster than that. I'm sure you could. I'm sure there are people out there who will claim that they can read it way faster. I'm sure that I know I rip on him all the time, but the man does the man does make really outlandish claims. I'm sure Steve Donahue will claim he could read them in a day. He can't. He's lying. He physically can't. Even if you were reading at a faster speed, even if we were assuming you were reading at 500 words per minute, which is too fast to physically read. The human eye cannot scan words that fast. And this isn't something you need to look up either. You have a human eye. Try it. You know I'm speaking the truth here. If we look at that, then even then we're looking at a 20 to 25 hour read. It's only 24 hours in a day. So no, he can't. But he'll still make these claims. He'll still claim, oh yeah, I can read that. He'll hold up giant biographies that are clearly hundreds of thousands of words, and he makes out as if he reads more than one of them a day. I don't know where he finds the time, frankly. And I'm not saying he doesn't read. He clearly does read. He clearly reads a lot. But I think he does a lot of skimming, and I think that he thinks he's reading when he's just skimming. And that's a shame. And the fact that he says he doesn't sub-vocalise, I think, speaks volumes to that. Sub-vocalising, especially with fiction, is required. If you're reading someone having a dramatic moment, if you are scanning through it at twice the normal speaking speed, and you're just getting the gist of what's being said, you're not taking in the scene. You're not building the scene. You have to read the description of the scene, and then you have to read the vocalization. You have to vocalize in your head. You have to read the dialogue at the speed it would be said, because you're supposed to be building the image in your head. The whole point of reading fiction is it's basically a film that you make with your imagination. Yeah, you wouldn't watch a film on fast forward, would you? So why would you read a book on fast forward? If you're reading dialogue, you should be reading it probably faster than it would be spoken, but not much faster than it would be spoken, because you want to get the tone and the feel, and the way the prose is written will often infer tone. So you want to insert that tone into the reading, and you can only do that if you're sub-vocalising. If you're scanning at 600 words a minute, you are studying the book. You're skim reading the book. So yeah, I don't believe people can read that fast. I just don't. And I believe there are a lot of liars on BookTube. Even people who don't believe they're lying, people who are lying to themselves. I think there are a lot of people who scan their way through books, who skip sections of books without thinking. They'll be reading something like, I know where the chapter's going, and skip to the end of the chapter. And yeah, you might know where the chapter's going, but you didn't read it then, did you? That's what I see personally on BookTube, and it makes me wonder when people are recommending these giant books, when people are recommending things like War and Peace and huge books. Les Mis, for example, which is one of the largest books out there. Middlemarch, over 400,000 words. The entirety of Lord of the Rings. I'm expecting people to read it in 1 month. You can read it in 1 month. It's over 500,000 words. You can read it in 1 month, but if you're going to read it in 1 month, that means you need to be reading, a minimum of 2 hours a day, every day. Again, really, to be able to read it through properly and really absorb it. That's not fun. That's work now. So, hopefully I've given you something to think on. Hopefully I've given you an alternative list of books that you can try and look into. One of the things that prompted me to want to make this list is I was talking to a few of the guys I run my D&D game with, and we were talking about what books we've read just in passing, and they casually mentioned that they tend not to really read all that often. And I thought, if I was going to suggest books to them that I thought they would enjoy, that might get them into reading, am I going to suggest these giant tomes? I really love A Song of Ice and Fire as a series. And I maintain that the first 3 books are fantastic books that can be read as a trilogy, even though the series isn't finished. But they are over 400,000 words each. That's over 1 million words. That's an insane amount of reading. That would be about 120 hours of reading to get through those 3 books. Now, that kind of reading, you can't just do that. That's a big project. 120 hours of reading. If we assume 30 days in a month and 120 hours of reading. Now, we divide that by 30 and we get 3. So 3 hours a day, every day, you could just about get through that 120 hours of reading. But that would be you going full force for 3 hours every single day. That's going to be a pain. That's not going to be enjoyable, is it? Right? And that's the problem I have with these kinds of books, is I love them, but they're just so damn long. And then there's things like, can you honestly, in good faith, recommend The Wheel of Time to a new reader? Really? 14 books, all of which are 250 to 350,000 words each. 30-hour reads per book, on average, for 14 books, over 4 million words of text. That's 6 months worth of reading straight away if you do nothing else but read for your hobby. People have jobs and lives and families and things. Like, it's very easy to say, oh, yeah, 3 hours of reading a day, you can do that. You can do that if you do nothing else. If you've got a job and a family, do you have 3 hours of free time to do a hobby in? And if so, do you have no other hobbies at all? And are you going to sit and read continuously for those 3 hours? Not focus on anything else? That means no watching YouTube, no browsing on social media, no messing about and just wasting time. You can't do any of that. You also can't do other hobbies. So if you've got any crafts you enjoy, any sports you enjoy, you can't be doing them. You can't be playing video games. You can't be watching TV. You can't be watching films. None of that's happening. You're not going out anywhere, so forget going to clubs or parties or anything along those lines. It's not happening because you've got to stay home and read. All the free time you've got is going to be reading, and you'd still spend half a year reading just to get through Wheel of Time. That's just too much. Like, and what if you don't like it? What if you get to book 4 and you find that you're just really not gelling with this? Then the sunk cost fallacy set in. Do you keep reading? Do you keep going because you've sunk 1 million words into this franchise already? Do you keep going and read the other 3.5 million? Or do you go, you know what, no, I want the other 4 months of my life. I want to do other things occasionally. That's the situation. So yeah, hopefully this has been an entertaining video and it's given you something to think on. Hopefully these book recommendations are interesting and that people get something out of this. And I will see you guys next time. Till then, bye.